needs immediate care. So what do we do in practice is you have to risk categorize a patient. Again, it's a very difficult decision. For example, when you're taking cancer endometrium, it's not just a high risk group like clear cell or serous, which is going to spread fast. Only after your surgery you are going to find out which patient has got which stage. So it's difficult, and you have to consider the patient's age, comorbidities. For ovarian cancer, sort of we going for a neoadjuvant chemotherapy. We used to do a lot of primary surgeries, but now most of the patients, especially those who are with sort of borderline operability and comorbidities, are going for NACT before surgery. And definitely we have to operate the endometrial cancers, and when a patient comes with endometrial cancer, the surgery should be done within 4 weeks. So that's how we are managing.
So ovarian cancer, you've totally stopped during primary surgeries, or still doing primary surgery for
advanced ovarian cancers? It's we are doing less of primary surgeries. For young patients, less than 60 years and with good performance status and definitely operable, we are going for primary surgery. For patients with comorbidities and borderline operability, we are going for neoadjuvant chemotherapy. And those cases which we used to do, like some indications like atypical hyperplasia, CINs, very early cancer cervix, we are delaying surgery.
Okay. And how are you counseling the patients when you're delaying surgery? Are they accepting the delay?
That counseling is a difficult thing, because our patients are more afraid of cancer than COVID. They're not afraid of COVID at all. There used to be a phase when it was sort of in early March when we started this lockdown and things. We had a theater list and patients refused to come because they were afraid of COVID, and they were hesitant to travel. But now the situation is COVID has increased so much, and the fear of COVID is gone, and the fear of cancer has sort of overtaken the fear of COVID. So, but we do tell them that for CINs, for very early cancer cervix, we do convince them that your delay for 4 to 8 weeks is not going to change your prognosis, and they do accept that.
Okay. And Dr. Sanam, how do you do? Because you are having a mixture of all patients. You'll be having a lot of benign cases also coming, patients with fibroids, endometriosis, or AUBs coming in for surgery. So how do you stratify them? How do you
actually, I'm doing obstetrics also. So,
yes. So I did not take option here because that entirely needs a 1 hour discussion, 1 or 2 hours discussion.
Yeah.
So I thought
so of course, stratify the risk as per indication and urgency. The emergent cases, that is the cases which have to be done immediately, we are just doing the antigen and sending the RT-PCR and taking up for surgery. Also emergency cesareans also we are doing the same way. That is emergency cases like ectopics, torsion ovary, all this we are taking it up immediately.
But other elective gynec surgeries, patients coming with bleeding or a big fibroid, and which we would have done surgery earlier, are you postponing surgery now, or are you still doing the same?
For the really symptomatic patients who are having continuous bleeding, pain, we are taking them up. And of course, the precancerous, I'm in a private setup, so precancerous, they are all very, they come with too much keenness for surgery, so we are taking those also up.
And have you faced any difficulty in telling patients about surgery? How do you counsel them during COVID?
No, we are taking we are taking a COVID consent as well. Actually, I stopped operating only in the early March, like, when that lockdown came in, just 1 or 2 weeks. And after that, we've been having steady patients. And now when the COVID is sitting on our head, patients are like coming up with more demands for surgery, actually. So every theater day I'm having cases, and now it's very difficult because we don't want to do too many cases on one day. So we are giving them dates.
And Dr. Satyinder, as a person who has managed in Delhi for the last 6 months in the midst of COVID, how do you think it has affected your surgery? Is it more now, less, or same?
Yeah. So we had a peak earlier than you all. So probably, I don't know that was good or bad. For first 2 months, March, April, end of March and April, and even May, we were not operating much. Initially, we delayed the cases for 6 to 8 weeks. But as Dr. Rama said, we were not operating early endometriomas. In fact, like low risk endometrioid carcinomas, even 2 patients I have put on Mirena also. And now I've got a 3 months follow-up also of those patients. It was put at that time just to delay the surgery for some time. So one of them came COVID positive. So anyways, we didn't want to do a surgery for her, and she was 80 plus. So we just put a Mirena for her at that moment. And till now she's doing fine. So we've just kept on follow-up now also. But high-grade endometriums, clear cells, serous, and advanced also we were operating. And those we could send for NACT, few stage 3, stage 4, we had sent for that also. Ovaries, early ovaries we had been operating. And in advanced ovaries, we continued. Those who were on neoadjuvant, we continued, and stage 3 and 4 we sent for NACT. And finally, after 2 months, we actually got that time to operate all these patients. So July and August, we have operated all the majority of the patients, but again, our peak has come back, and now again, we are having a lot of COVID patients. Now, the thing is, we have to prioritize again, because if we keep on doing all the surgeries right now, we'll be filling up our beds, hospital beds, for the patients, actually the COVID patients who actually need them. And our patients, if we can delay the surgery for some time, and we are not delaying, we are operating them now, will not leave any beds for the COVID patients. So that is why we have to balance the situation as per our scenario. So definitely we understand there are patients who have been waiting since long, but we have to see the priority. If it is actually urgent that we need to operate them now, you should consider operating them. But if the incidence of COVID is very high in your area right now, again, the peak is coming in Delhi again. So again, we have the number of surgical cases we are reducing. We are doing only urgent emergency surgeries, or the cases which we had actually delayed for long. So earlier we had kept them on observation, or we had just send them for NACT. Now most of them have finished. Like people who had already undergone 3 cycles of chemotherapy, we continued their chemo. Now the time has come when they have received 6 cycles of chemotherapy, and now we can't tell them you continue your chemo more. We have to operate them. So basically, we are prioritizing that list. So the patients we had delayed earlier, we are doing them now. And if it is an urgent emergency, we are doing. Second thing is, like for cancer, we have to see the survivor also. Anyways, if the patient even suffers from COVID, the mortality rate is 1%. But if the patient has cancer, and if we make a stage 1 patient ovary, we do not operate, and she becomes stage 3, in another 2 months, we are decreasing her survival from 90% to 50%, which is not a very good idea. So that based on that, we are actually stratifying our patients depending on how urgent is the surgery, and based on and what is the survival for these patients. If we have alternative options, we are sending them for that. Like cervix, we are giving them an option of radiation. Though at times I feel even that is not a very good option for early cervix, because surgery anyways, they'll be admitted in hospital for 4 to 5 days, but for radiation, they'll have to come for 6 weeks at least. So coming every day to hospital is also not a very good option for them. So, but we balance the risk, and we tell them and explain the things, and whatever way it is feasible, we do it.
Yes. So I think every scenario, every place, we have to have an individualized prioritization depending upon the volume at that point of time. If we don't have ICU beds, then we should not be taking up surgeries which involve very high risk. And if we have ICU beds and we think the patients can go home without complications, you have a window to operate, then take the chance and operate, right?
Yeah, right. Anupama,
Yes, madam.
Yes, the 2 points I would like to highlight are, see, RT-PCR takes 48 hours. So if the patient need an emergency surgery, we have to do an antigen test, and if the antigen is negative, we have to request if gene expert is available, that will be available within 2, 3 or 4 hours. If not, if the surgery is not emergency, we can wait for the RT-PCR. Another important point, when the patient comes for surgery, we have to make sure that the patient will not go back to the home, or make sure that whether she will not get a further exposure. So ideally, she should be kept in the hospital, in area near to the hospital, or a comfortable area for the patient. And another thing is, only the investigations are to be sent after the RT-PCR, because we have come across some instances where we did the investigations, and later the RT-PCR came positive, and then the persons who saw the patient were quarantined. So that has to be avoided. When so what we do now is we send RT-PCR, and then we will segregate the patient, and then afterwards only we send for investigations.
Okay, madam. We'll discuss about that more when we come to the pre-op COVID testing. So right now, when we are prioritizing surgery, so this is something which I saw when recommendation where they said that all the gynae surgery and even cancer surgeries are elective, which can take 1 to 3 months. They don't come under the indications of emergent, urgent, or urgent elective when you look at recommendations. But really, this is very difficult to convince our patients about this. You have a recommendation that is elective, but the patient will be panicking that even one day delay or 2 day delay is going to affect the prognosis. So that's why whenever you have a window, that is initially my policy was also in March, April, I thought I'll delay surgery more. But now I am looking at the present scenario, what is happening at the hospital at this point of time, plus the hospital has an infrastructure and ICU bed to take the patient in. And I expect for this expected course of her recovery. And then if that is there, I take in the patient. If that is not there, I ask her to wait and come back later. And ESMO also has looked into gynec cancers and said that they have divided into 3 tiers: high priority, medium priority, and low priority. And as for ovarian cancer is concerned, surgically they say high priority, take immediately only obstructions or perforations or post-op complications. Everything else come under medium priority. So they are also pushing primary cytoreductive surgery as something which is medium priority. So that is because primary cytoreductive surgery, again, we don't know for each patient what we are going to see inside is very unpredictable. Some patient will have very innocuous finding on CT, and when we open up, she might be having extensive deposits. So I am also skeptical in going for a primary cytoreductive surgery at this point of time. And most of my patients are still going for neoadjuvant chemotherapy for ovary. But endometrial cancer, as I said, endometrial cancer is something which we thought we can wait for some time with Mirena, progesterones. But now the waiting period is, if you can wait for 6 to 8 weeks, after this, is the COVID going to better after 6 to 8 weeks is a question. So whenever we are having a window, we are operating. Otherwise, one of my patients who came positive in PCR with a CA endometrium, that lady we have set her on progesterones, and now she's coming back for surgery next week. Ovarian cancer, cervical cancer, as we discussed earlier, radiation or radical hysterectomy. But radiation has the risk of coming to the hospital. The patient has to come to the hospital for 5 weeks, whereas surgery will get, the hospital visit of that patient will get over in a short time. So based on the facilities available at each center, the patient and the patient wish and the patient's disease status, I think the decision can be taken. And each time when we are taking a decision, I think it's a very dynamic. When after COVID only, I've seen so much of change. Each day, each week, situation changes. 1 week, you'll be very stable. You think you can operate, you'll post cases for the next week, and then suddenly your OT staff is going to become positive, your recovery staff is going to become positive, and you'll be facing a shutdown. Have you faced that, Dr. Rama, in RCC, that you're all ready to go?
I totally agree with you. You try to operate when you can, especially for your endometrium patients, because if you do off your surgery, her adjuvant can wait for another 8 weeks at least. You can totally wait for the next 2 months. You can get her adjuvant or whatever if needed after some time. So whenever possible, you try to operate. So now you have your resources. Your staff is okay, enough staff, enough resources. Your ICU is not flooded. You don't have a positive issues in your hospital. You operate now. But we have faced that issue, post-operative care, the staff has become positive. We had to shift the patients to an isolation ward, had to keep them under isolation for the next 7 days, and all of them were again retested. Like Radhamani madam said, we do COVID testing by GeneXpert, and that's a CBNAT. That's just before admission, and next day we operate. And thank God none of them turned out positive after surgery till now, but we had instances of our staff becoming positive because our staff is traveling from many other far off places to reach the hospital. So those issues have happened, and we had to isolate a group of patients in an isolation ward, and patients underwent that testing after 7 days, and good thing none of them turned positive. So all those issues have happened. So it is sort of based on individual patient. If your patient is healthy, you have a table to operate, do it off now, especially for endometrium.
And this is something which I saw when I was looking for this. The American College of Surgeons said your elective surgery should be restarted only if you have a sustained reduction in the new COVID cases for 14 days. But it's completely not applicable in, I think, any in Indian scenario. We restarted elective surgery when in every area when the COVID cases were increasing. So India cannot follow to any recommendations, I believe.
Yes, the big question of where does the cancer surgery come? When the government started that lockdown in late March and all elective surgeries postponed, we had this big question: what about cancer surgeries? We know that it is not an emergency; it's not an elective, so it comes in between. You can safely wait for 1 or 2 months, the maximum, but you have to start at some point of time. But now we all feel that we should have during the March we should have operated more and. Like Dr. Satyendra said, we also gave chemo and neoadjuvant chemotherapy. Now we feel that we should have operated them primarily then.
And how do when you are prioritizing cases, do you have full strength OT rooms, or you are having staff working at shifts, 50% shift as compared to before?
We don't have 100%. Actually, we stopped operating for first 2 weeks in March. And then we soon resumed our OT, but it's not, even now it's not 100%. Because we used to have 6 operating days a week and now it's only 5. And number of cases also in between, we used to operate 3 per day. Now it's only 2 per day because your intubation, extubation, time change, it takes some time because the cases are taking in between
do
time.
as before.
Yeah, we can't do as before. So that sort of issues are there. And also staff, we are doing surgery with the minimum possible staff inside the OT. We are totally stopped the visitors or trainees from outside. We have our residents and 1/3 of our staff are kept as reserve. So that the department can continue to function even if somebody turns positive. And our staff has also turned positive, but we never had to, we never had to stop
operating because of that.
Yeah. We keep a 1/3 staff under reserve.
And Dr. Sanam, how do you do this? You also do the same in your hospital because you have to manage multiple specialties and ops and gynae, everything. So
we've also had some staff turning positive, but luckily nothing happened to any of our patients. And so we are keeping some reserve staff and then, putting duties like that.
And Dr. Satyendra,
it's difficult. The theatre staff are not on full quorum.
Okay. Yeah. And in Delhi, are you past that stage of reserve? Everybody is coming, or you have a 50-50?
Right now, everybody's coming, but again, so we had that phase of everybody getting positive. In fact, I think 50% of the doctors in our hospital also came positive, and almost 70% of there was a time when almost 70% of the staff was positive and 50% of the doctors were positive. So that time almost it was a complete shutdown kind of thing. Nobody was actually coming at that time. That was in May. But then June, it picked up, and July, August, that was in June, sorry. July, August, everything became normal again. But again, since last week, our staff has again started coming positive. So the things, let's see what will happen in the next 2 weeks. I don't know. As of now, we are operating and our staff is coming. So we don't know what's the scene. That is why I'm also following the same thing. Whenever you get a chance, you just operate. If your hospital, you have enough support in the hospital for another 3-4 days for the time you're expecting the patient
to stay, operate.
Stop.
So pre-op testing, Dr. Radhamani Madam discussed this before. How do you do a pre-op testing for a patient? Patient screening, are you seeing patients in the OPD without testing? Or every patient is having some sort of a testing or a screening before you're seeing them in the OPD? And what sort of pre-op screening are you adopting? Rama Madam, do you have any screening?
In our hospital, the policy followed us before admissions, be it for surgery or chemotherapy or whatever. The patient undergoes COVID testing, and that's by CBNAT, which was initially made for TB, and you get the result within an hour. That's the advantage. And they're admitted only with a negative test. Positive test, we are sent.
Relative also, the patient attender also?
No, we are not testing the relative. We are insisting on serovisitor bar a single visitor who should be, we are not actually allowing visitors inside the hospital. In the private rooms, we are sort of discouraging them to take the private rooms. Patients are kept in the wards as far as possible. And a single visitor or zero visitor, we are advising if at all they need a visitor, only consistently a same person should come. We are not insisting on testing that person. But then in our OPD, we are not seeing patients after testing. And even for investigations, we try to keep that rule of social distancing and insist on using face mask and face shields even for the patients and relatives. That's how we are managing.
And how are you managing, Dr. Sanam? How do you do OP?
Of course, we are screening in the OP itself, the history, travel history, all that for patient as well as bystander. And then
any antigen testing done for OPD for the patient and
no antigen done for OPD patients.
So any
on
patient
admission.
coming from containment zone, hotspot area?
Yeah, then that we are seeing in the fever clinic in the segregated area only.
Okay.
So with full protection.
And surgery,
Anyway.
you are planning a PCR. Are you doing a CT scan for the patients before surgery?
No, not a CT scan, but we are doing an RT-PCR for all our
Within what time are you doing an RT-PCR?
Pre-surgical patients. Yeah, all our elective surgeries, patient is admitted and then the RT-PCR is sent, the other investigations and fitness and everything is taken. And by next day, the RT-PCR results come within around 14 to 16 hours. So we plan it on the next day.
So the patient is admitted only after the RT-PCR result, right?
Patient is admitted on the day of the swab is taken on the day of admission, and the surgery is done on the next day. That's how we are doing it here.
Okay. So what we are following is RT-PCR testing within
72 hours.
72 hours.
Okay.
So patient is getting tested and the patient is admitted only with a negative result. And now hospital has a policy of doing antigen testing for the patient attendant also.
Yeah.
So whoever is with the patient, they get an antigen testing done.
That we are also doing. We are doing the antigen test for the bystander.
And in between, there was a discussion about CT scan, but we are not using CT scan for screening patients or not looking at CT scan before posting for surgery. Only PCR, and the PCR is negative. As soon as possible, patient is taken in.
I believe there are some false negatives with the RT-PCR also. So that is where this HRCT is coming into play. So I was talking to some of my friends in Karnataka and in Tamil Nadu. It seems they are doing the HRCT routinely.
So even we are doing HRCT routinely for all our onco patients prior to surgery, along with an RT-PCR. So we have an RT-PCR in-house, so we get the report within 6 hours. So we do it one day prior and admit the patient in the evening once we have the RT-PCR report. But anyways, if the patient is not able to get the surgery done, then we are keeping a window of 72 hours for the RT-PCR. Otherwise, we get the report in 6 hours. But HRCT is still must. We are doing it for all patients.
And what do you see? If a PCR is negative and CT is showing some symptoms, you wait. You don't offer surgery.
And we wait, and after 48 hours, we'll repeat an RT-PCR.
And meanwhile, the patient will be admitted with you, or patient will be going back to
we are not admitting without an RT-PCR negative report. We don't admit the patient if there is any suspicion. We just ask them for home isolation if there are no symptoms, and ask them to stay at home and to report if there are any symptoms and repeat the test after 48 hours.
Okay. And this I would like to ask Dr. Shyam. So from anesthesia side, when do you feel is a safe time to do PCR? What is your comfort level in taking a patient in for surgery?
RT-PCR is mandatory for any surgery that we are going to do, because the anesthetists are at the highest risk, I would say, because we do some of the high risk procedures that are the aerosol generating procedures. We know that the aerosol generating procedures like intubation have a 6.5 times more risk for the performer contracting the disease if someone is positive. And extubation is something that we tend to not take it seriously, but extubation, I don't have a number to say how many times it's more significant, but actually it is thought that extubation could be even more dangerous than intubation, because intubation, we are paralyzing the patient. So aerosol generation could actually be controlled, but at extubation, we can't control that. So since we are doing this, these two are almost mandatory for any surgery, unless you can manage some of them with regional anesthesia, that is spinal or something like that. So if you want to give general anesthesia and intubate and extubate a patient, it's absolutely mandatory to have an RT-PCR. And as was discussed here, RT-PCR is not foolproof. You have false negatives. Almost 30% you can have false negatives. So what we currently follow is that when a patient comes, we do them antigen testing. But antigen testing, you have to remember, if it's positive, it's positive, but it's negative in a symptomatic patient, you can't take it as negative. But the results are quick, it's cheaper, so that's why we go for that. But if you want to do an emergency procedure, you have to go for an RT-PCR with a quicker method, like a GeneXpert or a TrueNAT. In our hospital, we follow the GeneXpert more than the TrueNAT. I'm not sure about the sensitivities, the difference between the two, but somehow we tend to believe that the GeneXpert is more sensitive than the TrueNAT in giving us a good result. So we go for the GeneXpert and then we take them up for surgery. But I understand that all surgeons and even anesthetists are uncomfortable, to do any procedure with all the coveralls and all that. So we would want an RT-PCR done at whatever cost. Coming to the HRCT, it's quite tricky. I mean, gynec surgeries are at an advantage that anyway they're going for a CT most of the time, at least. So you could include the chest along with it. But a CT alone, you can't take it as somebody is positive. You could have a lot of fallacies there as well. But it could be a pointer, like someone mentioned here. If you see someone with something like COVID, but RT-PCR is negative, you'll have to go recheck them after 48 hours. And any RT-PCR done more than 48 hours, I would be a little skeptical in still giving anesthesia for them. I would like as close as possible. In Delhi, I think one madam mentioned that they do the day prior to, so that's pretty good if you could do it, because the incubation period is set to be 3 to 5 days. So if you can have it within the 3-day period, within 48 hours, it would be good.
And if when you're having a patient with RT-PCR negative, do you still do this all precautions for anesthesia, or are you considering them still potentially the 30% chance? How important does the 30% play in your mind when you're giving a general anesthesia?
Absolutely, absolutely important. 30% is still a big number. So we're not doing away with any of the precautions. Of course, if the patient is RT-PCR negative, we may not go in with the full coverall, which you could call as a level 3 PP. But nowadays we have moved on to a level 2 PP for all entering the theater. Anybody entering the theater is going to wear a level 2 PP. That's at least a surgical gown, the splash proof surgical gown with a mask and 95 mask and a face shield and goggles, whichever is comfortable. So mask with face shield is almost mandatory, and the gown. Double gloves, I don't have to mention, and we are even providing with shoe covers now. So we are at level 2 PP for all people, anesthesia technicians, OT technicians, nurses, everyone. Now we have moved to that stage where we are going to have a level 2 PP. And regarding intubation, we still take precautions. We would prefer if the surgeons and the nursing team stay away from the theater. Like somebody was pointing out, there is a lot of delay. This is the delay due to, and it's for everyone's safety. I think we'll have to bear with this delay currently. So during the 20-minute period when we are intubating the patient, it's better that the surgical team stays out, and then only the intubating team stays there. And as recommended, it's a senior most person available should be intubating, but that's not possible all the time. But in a OT, whoever is senior most will do, and most of the time only one person will be there and one technician. So we do take all the precautions, and we have anesthetic plan has moved. We don't, pre-oxygenate them like we used to. We used to be bagging them during the 3-minute period of after giving a muscle relaxant. We have done away with that. We are going for the quicker acting muscle relaxant like rocuronium and all, so that we don't ventilate them, bagging as we call it. We don't do all that. So we have moved away from all those routine practices. This has currently become the routine. Now they know that even the technicians or even the junior anesthetists know how to go about doing it, since we have been doing it for a few months now. So we are taking all the precautions. And like I said earlier, even during extubation, that's the time we would really want the surgical team to step out of the theater. I'm not saying you de-scrub and go away, but you can be out of the theater in case there's an emergency, you need to come back. So, but you need to be outside the theater. And it's also important to switch off the, we can't operate without the AC. And most of the time you have the laminar flow. This is like a positive pressure room. It's not like a negative pressure room, but you can convert it into a negative by having the air changes modified. The engineering department can help you with that. If you can have more exchanges out than in, it becomes a negative pressure room. So we are trying to do that as well. But another thing we could do is switch off the AC during the time you intubate and during the time you extubate for 20 minutes. That will be very safe. And that time everyone else leaves the room. And then we use some sort of a plastic sheet over the patient when we are extubating. So this we are doing routinely for all patients, or even all the RT-PCR negatives. This is what we are following. I think that way we can safeguard. The other day also we had a patient who was positive in the next day of, this patient was tested, operated 10 days ago, then had to be taken up for an expiratory laparotomy, emergent, not a gynec patient though, but then it was operated. The patient had a sort of a crash, was resuscitated in the ICU, then brought to the theater. But in the theater, we wore all these sort of things, and the people who actually, this patient was positive the next day. It was identified, not next day, 48 hours later, she was found to be positive, and a whole lot of people had to be quarantined. But the people in the theater, the anesthetists who intubated and all that, was not positive. The anesthetist who intubated, the technician was there, because they were all wearing this level 2 sort of PP, which I told you, and all the precautions were being followed. But unfortunately, one of our anesthetists who resuscitated in the ICU turned positive, so that was a little unfortunate. So, we do take all precautions that are there, that have to be taken, even if they are RT-PCR negative.
So level 2 should be enough for us to get protection. That is what you're telling. Even if we don't have the level 3 for all patients, level 2 should protect us to some extent.
See, if you look at literature regarding PPE for COVID use, this level 2 and level 3, even though you can define them, it's not that the level 3 only will protect you and the level 2 will not protect you. I did quite a bit of literature search, because we, as you can understand, are the lot at the highest risk. So there was a good Canadian paper which showed us about the importance of PPE and all that. So level 2 and level 3 for me is a little arbitrary. What is important is, you need to have the N95 mask. There's no doubts about that. You need to have a goggles and a face shield on top of that. Of course, you are going to have a cap and all that. The monkey cap, if you can wear, that is good. After this, you're going to have a surgical gown, the disposable gown. The splash-proof disposable gown is mandatory. But with this, what is left is your neck area and the glove, the wrist area is something that could be exposed. The coverall that might be in place. So if you can have an additional thing that will, cover your neck, as well as see to it that you're wearing a proper glove over your, sleeve, then these are the two areas that's mentioned in the papers that are critical for you to be covering. So we have come up with some sort of a hood kind of a thing. That's a monkey cap with an extension which covers, and it comes all the way up to this. So we wear the surgical gown and the N95 mask and goggles and all that. And instead of the routine cap, we wear this sort of a hood, we call it hood. It's designed by us here, looking at various models. So our, facilities department, they do that for us. It's a disposable thing. It's made from the disposable material. So it will cover the complete neck also. So ours is kind of a modified level 3 from level 2, The idea is to cover your neck. That's a very crucial area, and the wrists that gets exposed. So if that is there, I think we are fine with it.
And as far as surgeons are concerned, Dr. Satyendra, what sort of a protection are you using when you're operating a patient? Level 2, level 3, level 2?
So we are using protection. We are using PPE along with the full respiratory mask we have. Most of us are using that thing. And definitely we are taking all the routine precautions of maintaining everything and not entering the OT once during intubation and leaving the OT out at time of extubation. We are taking care of all these things, and everybody, including the staff is most of the times they are not ready for these respirators and all, because definitely we ourselves have to buy. Rest of the things are provided by hospitals. So staff are using more of level 2 precautions, but as operating surgeon, me and my team, most of the doctors are using the level 3 kind of protection.
Okay. Dr. Rama, you're using a respirator, you're using a N95?
No, that we are not using a respirator. We are using something like Dr. Shyam said, but the idea of the hood is really good. I'd like to see the pictures, Dr. Shyam. We are not using that. As you said, neck area is definitely exposed. We are using otherwise level 2 with goggles and face shield and N95 and a triple layer on top of it, with a cap and splash proof aprons and shoe covers. And again, that rule of keeping outside OT for 10 minutes at least when they're intubating and extubating, and allowing only minimum people inside the OT. Even the sisters and nursing staff are going out, only the anesthetist and technician are remaining inside. And again, none of us turned positive inside the OT, although some of the patients after surgery turned out positive, not a gynec, but that's what we are using there.
So we were all reassured by this scenario which Dr. Shyam mentioned about that patient being positive, and the entire team who had N95 and level 2 precautions turned out to be negative. So we don't know whether it will repeat for every patient. We hope that, because I don't think in our hospital, none of us are wearing a respirator still now.
We are not wearing a respirator, and even without respirator, operating for 3 to 4 hours with this goggles.
With the N95 and goggles also.
N95 is very tiring, and it sort of makes our life very hard now.
But respirator will make it easier for you, right?
I know respirator is making
it's even we used 95 earlier, but it's very difficult to operate for 3-4 hours with with everything on PP and this. But with respirators, things have become more comfortable, and we are using that hood. So in that hood, they just have only the eyes are left uncovered, so you can put a goggles over it. But now we have to cut that thing to fit our respirator. Actually, we have to make that hole a bit bigger, and so that our respirator fits into it, and then we can use a goggle and use that. So, but it's very comfortable with respirators on.
So this is the rule of 20, which mentioned in the literature. If you can have a 20 air changes and 20 minutes interval. If you can stay out of the OT after intubation and during extubation. So this 20 minutes rule will might help us in this 2020 pandemic. Because most of the time we don't get 20 minutes after intubation, right? We have to go in more faster than 20 if you don't have to delay the surgery. Otherwise,
we should be insisting on that. The 20 minutes is important, and also the 25 air changes. Our theater is really old, but even there, and engineering people are now doing that more than 25 air changes. So we don't have negative pressure OTs, but instead of that, this is working.
So in our institution, we have negative pressure OT, but there only the COVID positive patients are taken in. So all other patients are in the routine OT, and I don't know how many OTs are having this 20 air changes. Dr. Shyam, do you have an idea where in our institution what the air changes are they doing?
We were having 12 to 16 air changes. So currently they are upgrading that to 24 air changes, and 24 air changes are pretty good. Even at 16 air changes, I wouldn't say it is bad. But the minimum will be 12 air changes are necessary. If you can upgrade it to 24 air changes, that will be really great. And 24 is the good number to have. We were having 16 air changes, so we've asked them to upgrade. But then when you upgrade the air changes, what happens from an engineering point of view is that the capacity of your air condition has to be hiked up. Otherwise, you can't have the air changes, and then the AC will not work. You can increase the air changes, it is easy, but then the AC will not be effective. So your AC will have to be upgraded first, and then you can go for the increasing the air changes. So if you can have 24 air changes in an hour, that is really good.
Okay. So what are the other special precautions that you do in open surgery? Because initially we heard a lot of bad things about MIS, which has now taken back again. And we know that there is, do you believe that there are a lot of aerosols coming out when we are opening up the patient or when we are doing abdominal surgery, in gynec surgery? What is the real risk of aerosols, and how are you minimizing the risk of aerosol, Dr. Satyendra? How are you doing it? And I know you are wearing respirators. Other than that,
no, other than that, it is mainly the cautery use, which is the monopolar cautery which we use, which is according to during open surgery. Because people are used to using cautery, and we are not using knife as of basic teaching only. We have started using more of cautery in oncology. We don't use.
Yes.
So it's now because
you have changed it to scissors.
Yeah, so we are trying to use less of cautery and use more of knife during the surgery. Though we
but
feel
does it increase your surgery time?
Yeah. more of, and the field becomes so bloody using the
Yes,
knives.
yes.
We don't like it actually, but anyways, we are trying to do that as much as possible, and we don't have that cauteries fitted with the suction with us. So, but one person is always holding the suction near that, so that less of that cautery fumes are spread. That's the main thing which we are taking care of. And during laparoscopy, what we are using is we don't have that proper
Or evacuation systems.
Evacuation system. So what we have done, just done it the port where we use for deflating. In that we attach the suction tube, and in the suction machine, so though we don't use a pressure in that. We just put some hypochlorite solution. So whatever air is there, it will go through that hypochlorite solution, and so that there is no direct exposure to anybody in the whatever we can do to avoid that thing we are doing.
Same thing that we are doing here also in MIS. Dr. Rama, what are you doing? You prefer MIS or open? If you can do a patient, CA endometrium is coming, and what sort of surgery would you prefer for her?
It depends on the patient. Whenever possible, we'll try to do, whatever is ideal to the patient. In a C endometrium, which is fit for an MIS, we'll definitely go for a laparoscopy. We
Because
don't
the
have
initial guidelines of not doing
MIS but initially we sort of stopped for the first 2 months or so in May. I think in June also we were a little hesitant, but since June we have restarted our MIS. And in open surgery, we never stopped using cautery. It's so much used to cautery that, can't do without that. But we sort of reduce the power setting. Now I operate with 20. I used to operate with 30. Now it's 20. And try to minimize the cautery use, because, the time is also important. We don't want the blood to splash there. So that is also bad. So we are trying to do whatever is best. Try to minimize your surgical time. And in laparoscopy, like Dr. Satyendra said, we don't have a proper smoke evacuation system. We attach a small tube to the sisters modify a HEPA filter or something which the anesthetist uses, and that acts as a carbon dioxide filter, and that's being used. And we try not to, when a specimen retrieval, we deflate and then take out the specimen. All those things we are trying to do.
So that is what we are also doing, because initially when they said that minimally invasive surgery is bad, at that time also I did not believe that minimally invasive surgery was bad, because aerosols are there both in open surgery and MIS, and people were concerned only about aerosols coming out through MIS. So at that time itself, before these indications came itself, we were doing that, minimizing the aerosol, generation and release into the that open the release of gas. That was a common part of our robotic surgery. We used to release gas and smoke through one port. That got stopped, and that evacuation came through a modified this is the recommendation at that time. Italians started using this modifying this anesthetic filter and connecting it to the vent, and seeing those Italians making presentations somewhere. I think now across India, all of us are doing the same thing, that using the HEPA filter or the ULPA filter, which is attached to the endotracheal tube, that is being attached to one port, and through that the gas is going through an underwater seal of sodium hypochlorite solution, so that there's a HEPA filter plus a underwater seal of sodium hypochlorite to take care of the virus, if any it comes through that. But I personally feel the risk of aerosol coming through that is very, very, very less. I feel as I don't know whether I'm, because they have not really proved that aerosolization of virus is the scenario, and you can get infection through aerosol, right? They have not proved for other viruses also very strongly. So still I'm doing this, and we are and all this port, the number of times the instrument is being changed, that is being less, and robotic surgery has an advantage that instrument change is very less. So I prefer robotic to lab now, because we have access to both, and I'm sort of very hesitant to go for lab surgeries now, because the number of instrument changes is very high for lab. Each time I coagulate and then go to the other pedicle, I have to go and change the instrument. So whenever robotic is possible, I go for robotic, and other surgeries are coming off as usual. So this is I feel this paper also summarizes what I felt at that time when the evidence was coming against minimal invasive surgery, that laparotomy could have actually given more risk than laparoscopy. But we also don't have a smoke evacuator. Anybody, Dr. Sanam, are you having a smoke evacuator?
No, I don't have a smoke evacuator. As Dr. Rama said, we are fitting a filter to the to one of the ports.
Ports.
Yeah.
And open surgery, I think all of you, we are holding a suction close to the cautery, right?
We do have a cautery with suction, but that's a little, what do you call it? It's not very handy.
It's a heavy,
Deep in the
heavy
pelvis,
instrument to use.
I mean, test people are using it regularly, but in deep pelvic surgeries, the tip is not long enough. Probably we need some modifications on that. We do use that, but sometimes in between I stop, and for in the depths of the pelvis, it's difficult. It's quite a chunky thing. So it's difficult to do that in the
And one thing I just wanted to ask you all is when they say when your N95 is properly fitted, you should not smell anything. The smoke you should not feel. But as long as whenever I switch on the cautery, even though I'm wearing an N95 mask, I smell the cautery smoke. Is that true for all? Or with respirator,
Yes.
are you not smelling it?
Later you don't.
Yeah, but then I don't know about the smoke. It's a respiratory virus, right? So how much of it is in the smoke? We don't know really.
We don't know.
Nobody has proven it, although there are concerns, but nobody has proved that causing this. It's basically a respiratory virus. It's not like HIV.
And I feel lap or robotic, if we do, the patient can go home fast. That is a one big advantage.
Whatever. The ERAS is working out well now, Anupama. You introduced us to ERAS in Kerala. So ERAS is now very helpful. We are discharging patient even after open. We are discharging by third and maximum fourth day. And that's very useful now.
It's very useful. Patient is open surgery maximum 2 days now. When in introduction itself, I say hospital is a very dangerous scenario for you to be in. You go home or you stay in a place where you're not seeing anybody else. So they also now they are happy to comply to our instructions, right?
Yeah, they are happy to go home.
And what do you feel, Sadam, in your hospital also you're able to discharge them early?
Yes.
What sort of surgery do you prefer?
Yeah, second day or max third day.
So you prefer, if you can do both lap and open, and you prefer a lap minimally invasive approach rather than an open approach? Or you
Definitely. Minimally invasive over open.
So I think since we have waited far in Kerala for the peak to happen, all those controversies are gone. We can safely do minimally invasive if the patient is indicated. You had that. You must have had that problem earlier, right? So I think that when the COVID started,
for at least 2 months. Now in July only we started doing the lap surgeries. We didn't do at all initially. We stopped doing the laparoscopic surgery because initially there was a lot of view about it that don't do lap surgeries. It's a lot of aerosol generation. We should do only open. So initially we did avoid. We didn't do anything. But now we have started. And in fact, patient goes home early.
Yes.
Especially for endometriums, you can discharge them next day with the lap, and then you have to keep them for 3 days at least with an open surgery. So now we are doing lap wherever feasible.
And we have the feeling that whatever is aerosol is there, it's inside the peritoneal cavity. It's not coming out. I don't know how.
And this advantage, I feel robotic also, I feel that we are not standing very close to the patient, right? Whatever aerosol is coming out also, everybody can relax. Even the assistant, even the nurse, everybody is slightly heavy. And laparoscopy is right there and inhaling the smoke.
You
There
have
is
to be
another
there.
study had come up which says that in peritoneal fluid the amount of virus is around 20 times higher.
It's higher. Okay.
Is it?
When we are doing an open surgery, I think we are getting more exposed to that.
More exposed than minimally invasive surgery. And open surgery, you don't have any control, especially if you're opening a big midline incision, you don't have any control of getting.
But then you don't have a choice. Majority of our patients are ovarian cancer, and you don't have a choice for a large majority.
And even now, what I'm seeing is after the COVID, the patients who are coming in, their financial status also have diminished. Previously, they could afford robotic surgery somehow, and now those category patients, they're telling because they can't even borrow now. Many people have lost their jobs. They don't know if they borrow, how will they pay back? So the financial crunch we are seeing, I don't know, in RCC you might not be seeing that.
Yeah, we don't have that sort of issues because majority are getting government assistance.
Are you seeing this in Delhi?
There's a lot of Delhi. Because people, they don't have reserve. Whatever the money the people had, they have finished in this 3-4 months. Now they don't have jobs. they are really facing that crunch. So whatever even we try to, in fact, for open surgery also, people are not able to pay, even if they try to.
So, and I'm also must be seeing that, right?
Yes,
We are
yes,
also
definitely.
the cash crunch we are really seeing. I don't know how long will it take for them to get over this.
Another
This
thing
financial
that we are seeing is delay in getting treatment. People
Yeah.
sort of sit at home with the symptoms for a longer time now.
They're coming at a point where they
They're-
cannot bear the
Yeah,
symptoms
yeah, that's
anymore.
what. In Kerala, we always thought that they sought medical attention earlier. Here, with the COVID around, people are coming late.
But they're coming, more people are coming, but they're all coming at the brim where they can't manage the symptoms
Yeah, that's
anymore
what.
now.
They keep on having
All the-
bleeding for many days, and then only they seek medical attention. They're all afraid to go to hospital. So we are getting patients in a little more advanced stage than
Yes, true.
only time will tell what
Correct.
happened to
What
them.
kind of a stage migration happened?
Yeah.
Even I got some three endometriums consecutively with metastasis to ovary, which we don't get very common.
That's what.
Three consecutive cases had a mets to ovary, and I was wondering what was this an upgrade? And they were endometrioid too, not not a high grade or clear cell variety. And, so that is, in short, I think that we have covered all. So we are, I think we all agree that we should prioritize surgery to multiple factors, not just the patient's indication, but the resources that is available to us at that point of time. And whenever we can fit in a patient, indicated patient, fit in and finish the surgery. And we all agree on preoperative COVID testing with PCR, ideally within 24 to 48 hours before surgery. We don't, nobody operates with antigen, right? I don't think anybody of us operates with antigen testing.
No.
So we all operate with COVID testing. Again, with CT scan, I think we had a, there is some, I think some of us do CT scan, some of us don't do CT scan. I think depending upon your resources and depending upon the COVID scenario at your place and the hospital protocol, you can decide whether CT scan is necessary. And PPE, I think most of us agree on the level 2 PPE. We're all using the level 2 PPE till now. Level 3 with respirators makes it more comfortable for us to breathe, but it is more bulky to put on our face. Right?
Yeah, but after doing surgeries with N95, by the time you go home, you start feeling you have
Yes,
COVID.
yes.
Because you're so
True.
tired. At the end of the day, you start
It's
feeling
suffocating.
Yes.
you yourself are suffering from COVID. But with respirator, that thing is little better because you don't feel that tired. So at least you don't feel like having those symptoms.
So, but how do you clean the respirator? Isn't cleaning that a bit difficult?
So you have to change the respirators after some 20 hours of use or whenever you start feeling down. Otherwise, I just, after finishing the surgery, I just put this sterilium on it and just leave it for the next day. And next day I'll come it and use it again. So that's what I'm doing. Or sterilium nicely over it and leave it.
Something which we in Kerala can consider maybe respirator.
Yeah, I think
finding it
as
difficult to operate
cases are increasing, we might have to go for.
And since we are operating multiple
respirators
cases
for
on a
ourselves.
single day, it might make it easier for us to breathe.
Otherwise, doing after one case only, you will start feeling like
you're
tired and feel like doing the second case. But with
Yes.
respirators, at least you will feel a little comfortable and you can think of doing a second case.
Yeah, definitely something worth trying because we are stretching to our limits. Sort of some days we feel we are stretching to the limit. The respirator, probably we should be switching over to two good messages from Dr. Satyendra, doing a CT and
Using
switching on to respirators.
if you want to work for longer hours and
Yeah,
work comfortably.
definitely worth it.
What sort of respirator can, because
Multiple companies are having respirators now.
yeah, there are different types, I think. So
You are using a full face or half face?
It's available. So whatever the full face one is very bulky. So, but if you are comfortable, they are the best. But you don't even need a face shield in front of the full face ones. What I am using is a half face one, and I use a face shield or a goggles whenever needed. So half face is still more. It's you can't use them in OPD because it's very difficult to speak, and people can't hear you what you're saying. So some people.
OT, how is it your communication? In OT, when you wear, can they listen?
So in our case, some anesthetists, especially those who are posted in the COVID wards, they are using respirators. Along with that, they have kept those small mics with them to communicate with them. Call us mic to communicate otherwise in the patient. But the people, ICU people who are posted in COVID ICUs, they are using that because it's easier for them to communicate with the patient, and they also feel safe in those respirators.
But during OT, your instructions are being carried out. You're getting things that you want, and
Yeah.
no problem.
If you don't have to sometimes communicate. See, in the OP theaters, if you use a respirator, patient is also sitting at a 2-meter distance from you. So at that time, you literally have to shout. But in the OT, the people are very close to you, so they can hear you. So that much problem is not there in OT. But if there's a distance, 1-meter distance between you and the person, then you'll have to literally shout to talk to them.
And another concern I had about respirator was they don't have an expiratory filter, right? They all have expiratory valves.
Yeah.
So do you keep a mask over that? Like, because...
No, I'm not keeping any mask over that.
So, unless we are all negative and...
Work much on that. That's right.
I think the other madam is, madam, do you have another meeting?
Yeah, one thing I would like,
yes,
the time is over. Now the time is 6:10.
Yes,
so
madam. Yes, we started a bit late, but we are...
So let me conclude because the time is over. And then I would like to say that you very well conducted, Anupama, and very well said also. The excellent participation by the panel members also, and the anesthesia part where and Dr. Shyam elaborated very well. And then one thing you said is with the advantage of robotic is change of instrument is noted. Good that, but you know that only very few or minimum number of persons are involved in robotic surgery. Another thing is open surgery and the vaginal surgery. Vaginal surgery, when I did the vaginal surgery, then I came to know that the smoke is very close to your face. So when you use cautery, that I experienced because during the March period, March and April, when I did the vaginal surgery, then I came to know that the smoke is very close to your face rather than the open surgery or the minimal invasive surgery. And then so the thing is we have to avoid the surgery, so the cautery during vaginal surgery. And another recommendation is when you go for a laparoscopic surgery, also if a GI problem, a GI is involved, it is the recommendation is convert to open surgery rather than do the laparoscopic surgery with the GI. When gynae surgery when GI is, that's a recommendation is given. So actually,
I think that recommendation was earlier, right? Now we don't have any recommendation of, now they don't consider open to have any advantage over lap surgery. So initially when the COVID started, they all thought that this laparoscopic surgery or robotic surgery, they emit a lot of aerosol and aerosol will release and contaminate the entire OT. But now it is considered as more safe. For all procedures, it is considered as more safer than even the Society of Gastroenterology Surgeons also. They are recommending minimally invasive surgery whenever possible.
Yeah. Okay. Well, the thing is, we have positive patients we have to do in the negative pressure theater.
Yes.
Otherwise, the advantage of negative pressure theater is spread to the other staff in that area is reduced. That is the reason why the negative pressure theater, and outside it will not go outside. That's the reason. Whereas the positive pressure, the movement of the air from the sterile to the unsterile area is reduced. So that in the positive pressure, when we anesthetists, definitely they must wear the PPE 2 or 3, whatever is their protocol in the hospital according to the hospital policy. They have to go like that.
Okay. So if any doubts from the participants, I think I can. You can. Any question answer? The attendees are having no doubts. I think we can.
I think one question was there regarding goggles. Dr. Rama.
Yeah, I answered it. You can definitely wear goggles on top of your spectacles. I always do that. So probably you should select the goggle accordingly. It's okay.
So respirator, what about the respirator? Should we cover the valves? That is something which I was asking Dr. Satyendra also, but I've seen people put a 3-layer mask over the valve. So because the respirator, I think, have 2 bulges on 2 sides, right, Dr. Satyendra? So over those bulges, a triple layer mask with an elastic band can be kept comfortably. So your respiratory...
anesthetist use a respirator regularly.
Okay.
Seeing the size of it,
I'm sorry, Sanam, I think we couldn't hear your question, Sanam. The connection was erratic at that point.
yeah. The sheer size of the respirator itself, like, you know, it makes you feel. So I avoided wearing it. My anesthetist kept asking me, telling me to wear a respirator, but I think soon we will have to start because our cases are coming up so much.
So I think in the next 6 months, I think we'll be having tough time. It's time that we
Yes.
take maximum precautions and screen and treat entire community. There's no hotspot anymore. I don't believe in that hotspot and containment zone anymore. It's just an arbitrary marks. So every patient is at risk and every area is at risk. So I'm considering everybody is positive and then operating. Even though operating also, I feel consider everybody as positive. PCR value.
And that's what don't.
I feel more than the OT patients, it's from the OP that we are going to get, or you know,
No,
as
I think
doctors,
it's now it is
or
colleagues.
OT or
You look at your
staff.
Yeah, you're going to get it from your colleagues more than
Yeah,
the
that's
patient.
what maintaining social distancing among our colleagues
Among
and
our colleagues.
students is difficult.
Yes.
So, but try to do that all the time.
And Chatindra, I heard earlier you also had an incident where your colleagues were positive, but you escaped. How did you escape?
So probably maybe I was using all the precautions. And see, I don't know if that's a good thing or not, because probably I enter the OT later than my fellows and all who reach the OT earlier. We open up the abdomen, then we enter inside, and they are more exposed rather than us. So that's why my fellow came positive and we escaped. And probably taking the precautions. Main thing is you should not. So the main what we normally do is, it's a tendency, as soon as the surgery is finished, we'll remove our mask also.
Yes.
We tend to remove, along with the gloves, everything, we tend to remove the mask also in the OT. So though but so we should take care of that thing, because that is the time you'll be most exposed. You want to just breathe and initially, but later,
Yes.
that breathing is the time you'll take in the most infection. So at least go to a separate area, take care of that thing. Just don't remove your N95 mask at that time, just to take a deep breath at that time after the surgery, because that time we need to.
Yes. And how many times you can remove your N95 and reuse on the same day? Like if you're having lunch, you remove your N95. Are you wearing the same mask again, or are you putting on a different mask? Are you washing your face before you have lunch? Those sort of things makes me always wonder, what should you be reusing that mask again?
Okay, sir.
Yeah, please, Dr. Amal.
What I do is I wear a triple layer, and I always insist my residents also a triple layer on top of a 95 and 2 caps inside the OT. When you describe, remove the cap and the triple layer, and go off from the OT with the N95. And you need a lunch break at least, and use another N95. We get the N95 plasma sterilized from the. It's not a single use. We get it plasma sterilized from our theater. So give it for plasma sterilization and wear another N95 for the second case. That's what we try to do.
That's what I'm also doing for cases when I'm having after having a lunch. I'm not using the same mask again. I'm using a different mask. We also get the N95 sterilized, so it's at least 5 to 6 uses per mask is there. So, but there are because I think the reuse of N95 is only in India, so we will not have any recommendations saying what to do and what not to do.
The reuse by plasma sterilization is working well. We are doing it since March. It's 3 uses, but that's working well now.
Okay, I think we have answered all the questions, and I think all our questions are also answered. So thank you all for a very interactive discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anupama. Very happy to be a part of it.
Sign out to you.
Okay, madam.
Thank you, madam.
Gracie, madam, Radhamani, madam. So,
thank you very much.
Bye-bye then. Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Stay safe and healthy.
Stay safe I think we can meet after.
Yeah, stay safe.
Until we meet each other. Stay safe.
all of you.
Bye bye. Thank you.
Bye.
And sacrifices for your patients.
Yes, madam.
You are taking a lot of risk and sacrifices for your patients, looking after the patients in this COVID season.
Yes, ma'am.
My only advice is to look after yourself. That is more important, you know. So stay safe and healthy. Thank you.
Yes, madam. Thank you. Thank you, madam. So with that, can we conclude the session now, Anandita?
Okay.
Yes, madam.
Thank you, all of you. A much needed topic to be discussed because as COVID-19, so that we can follow the guidelines and do best care of the patients. And we'll discuss regarding such topics in future also. So we'll conclude the session, and I wish all of you to stay safe and healthy. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you very much.